Hello everybody, my name is Elizabeth Taylor from TPAS Cymru, and today we have here Shelter Cymru. We have got Gemma Price, who's the coordinator of Shelter Cymru Live. She looks at national housing advice and the telephone service, web chat and email. So welcome, Gemma.
Thank you.
We also have JJ Costello, who is the head of Housing Service South. JJ is responsible for housing services across Wales, housing advice, debt advice and housing support. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. And we're just going to ask a few questions. Should we just go ahead and start? Fab. Okay. So we know that Shelter provide several support channels. So what are the three most common things that you're contacted about?
With regards to that, Elizabeth, I mean, what we have found on the advice line that's coming through, and it's always been prevalent with the advice that we provide, is homelessness inquiries coming through to us, whether that be people who are homeless or people who are threatened with homelessness. But there's been a significant rise now over the pandemic for people accessing our services for homelessness advice. And again, I mean, that may well be that people now, and with regards to Welsh Government and the emphasis of not having people who are rough sleeping, so perhaps people who have approached the local authorities before and have that assistance, but not come under the criteria for priority need, unable to access temporary accommodation now due to the pandemic. So we are seeing an increase of people coming through to us with regards to homelessness inquiries.
Mm-hmm. So did they just call you up and say, I'm trying to find somewhere to live?
Yeah, do you mean with regards to the advice line, do you mean people will call us up and we let that individual speak to us about what the issue is first of all, and it could well be that somebody is saying that, and what's happened is what we found quite a lot since the pandemic, and people come through to us and they've said that I've been hit homeless for a couple of months. What help and advice can I get? And some people don't know that they can approach the local authority for that homelessness assistance. So we will provide that advice, signpost with regards to the local authorities information, and sometimes then also assist those individuals making homelessness applications.
Okay, so homelessness, are there any other topics that people contact you about?
Yeah, certainly. Again, with regards to sort of like homelessness, there is Section 21 and possession proceedings coming through to us. Again, we've seen a rise during the pandemic of Section 21 notices come through to us. And there's been so many changes with regards to possession proceedings and the extension of notices as well. So people will come through to us and ask, with regards to possession proceedings and what the length of time is. There is obviously a huge increase of those notices coming through the advice line and all our services across Shelter Cymru as well.
And what is the length of time currently?
Currently it's 6 months. From the 29th of September, any notice served on somebody would be for a minimum of 6 months. There are exceptional circumstances sometimes with antisocial behaviour, but with regards to our Section 21 notice and the Section 8 notices, the minimum period for the majority would be 6 months.
Is that going to be sustained after March, or is it?
We as Shelter Cymru would hope so, and campaigning to do so as well. Obviously Shelter Cymru want to end Section 21 notices to stop people being made into homelessness. So that is currently something that we would like to see happening, but nothing as yet.
Okay, thank you.
Can I pick up the third area?
Yes, absolutely.
Which in normal times, about a third of our work is people falling into rent arrears and then receiving notices and being taken to court with possession proceedings. During the pandemic, it's gone fairly quiet because social landlords have had an agreement not to take any action, and the courts have actually been closed for possession action. So the courts only opened up again sort of at the end of August for possession actions, and we're only now starting to see the very first few being listed in courts in about November. But obviously with the state of the economy and the threats to unemployment, we're very much gearing ourselves for this to grow again, significantly after Christmas. And I suppose the message we'd always want to send is that early advice, please, do seek advice as soon as you could see that you're going to get into trouble, or as soon as you're getting into trouble, rather than waiting until you get court papers and things, because there's a lot more that can be done if you contact us early.
Yeah, that's a good point to be made. Is that so? You do get people from social housing calling you as well as the private rental sector?
Yes, they're well represented. They're a core part of the people that use our services, and homeowners too.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Homeowners as too.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. This one might be for you as well, JJ. Welsh Government have carried out a number of initiatives to keep people in their home over this COVID period. So extending the minimum notice period, as we've just mentioned, from eviction, tenancy support loan scheme that was recently launched. And do you think that people are actually aware of these things?
Well, I think the notice period has been really useful, and to some extent, whether tenants are aware or not, the courts are checking and won't allow sort of evictions to go ahead if the proper notice hasn't been served. So that's a real positive. But there is always the danger that tenants aren't aware, receive the notice, and then give up their tenancies because they think they have no option. And we're certainly getting plenty of examples of the wrong notice having been given. So no, I think it's fair to say that tenants and landlords aren't necessarily aware. It has changed a lot recently, and there are sort of different dates and different requirements depending on different dates. So it is a bit complex. So no, I don't think there's good awareness on that. Having said that, I mean, the Welsh Government working with the Ministry of Justice have been, really positive around this area, and we certainly haven't seen evictions during this period, which is fantastic. I suppose the flip side of that is that there are people with significant arrears building up, and that at some time those are going to come to a head. So the problem is moved down the road rather than solved. But in terms of tenancy saver loans, a great idea, very welcome. It has a specific applicability. It's not for people in receipt of housing benefit. And there are a set of circumstances. It has to be sort of COVID related rent arrears. So in our own services, we haven't found yet many scenarios where it's potentially being used, but a welcome addition. Yeah,
and I would welcome some stats on that as well, on how many people are taking it up and things. I think I'm part of a Rent Smart Wales group, and last time Welsh Government mentioned the tenancy support loan scheme, so hopefully we'll get some stats on that soon. It'd be interesting to know. Thank you. You mentioned that you get different phone calls from social tenants and private rental sector tenants and homeowners, which I didn't know. What's like the difference between kind of calls between social tenants and private tenants, or is there not really a difference?
Maybe
Gemma?
Yeah, I mean, we've noticed with regards to private rented sector is we get quite a lot of disrepair coming through to us. And we have seen a significant rise in disrepair cases coming through with regards to the private rented sector. So that has shown to be coming up in our stats, but also with regards to the private rented sector, mainly, we are getting mainly the possession proceedings and notices coming through there. With regards to social housing, it tends to be where there is antisocial behaviour with regards to their tenants and potentially action taken because of that reason.
Okay. So in terms of ASB, you mentioned there's a different proceedings. How would you explain that to tenants? What's the difference between if ASB is happening in the private sector or ASB is happening in the social sector?
It also depends on type the person's tenancy as well, and their security of tenure as well, because the proceedings can be the same as well as in private rented sector and in the social sector. So if anybody in social housing is a starter tenant or an introductory tenant, then the Section 21 notice can be issued within their first year of their tenancy. And of course, then that is a no-fault eviction. No reason can be given behind that. However, we do see with social housing that there is, if that is the case, then there are reasons reasons given towards what's been happening and why that notice has been issued to somebody. With regards then with any antisocial behaviour, there would need to be a ground for that possession. So do you mean there needs to be a proven ground then to go along that possession proceedings route?
So is that in the private sector, if a landlord, if neighbours are saying that this tenant's commit an ASB, that landlord, the private sector landlord, does he have to or she have to provide evidence then that they've tried to work with the tenant to mitigate this ASB, or is that just in social housing?
Yeah, in both. I mean, there are two grounds on with regards to the Section 8 notice, and there's a mandatory ground and there's also a discretionary ground with antisocial behaviour. So with regards to a private landlord, if they were going to rely on the Section 8 notice, there would need to be a conviction of antisocial behaviour against that individual to go onto the mandatory ground. If there was issues with neighbours and it was the landlord's assumption that something was going on from feedback, then they would be going along the discretionary ground then, and it would be the court's discretion whether to make an order or not. So what we tend to find in the private rented sector though is if this is going on, it tends to be a Section 21 notice that is issued against people, because obviously there's no reason, the landlord doesn't have to give a reason why they're issuing that notice.
Probably worth just mentioning, amongst social landlords, there's a few examples that have concerned us over the last few months around antisocial behaviour, with the use of injunctions and exclusion orders, so that people are excluded from the property via an injunction rather than through possession proceedings. This has been used in a few cases sort of during this lockdown period, and we don't see it as particularly good practice or gives the tenant the sort of range of protection and sort of access to justice that the full possession proceedings have.
No, I just think, if a tenant's calling up to find out, what support they can have because they've been issued a notice based on their behaviour, I think that really shows some kind of initiative from the tenant as well to make that phone call. So maybe they are that would say to me that they want help, like they need support. So that's really an opportunity, I guess, for you guys. Must be quite frustrating actually, because you can see that they're calling up and they want support, and then you're not sure. Can you put them in a different direction and offer them services or partner up with other organisations?
We've got a legal team who offer legal representation in antisocial behaviour cases. So we can advise and assist in these particular cases. But as you say, we've run projects before for people accused of antisocial behaviour, and to a great extent, there's often many unmet support needs. And people accused of antisocial behaviour are also victims of antisocial behaviour often. So it's a complicated picture, and our general position as an organisation is that eviction just moves the problem around, it doesn't resolve the problem. And we've had a successful project with a support intervention that was about 85% successful at resolving the antisocial behaviour without moving people out.
Oh, that would be interesting to hear more about maybe after this. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like the issue of antisocial behaviour and how people, I think there's this kind of trauma-informed approach across the social sector anyway that's happening, and I think that's fantastic and necessary. Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you work with stakeholders to refer on then if somebody's struggling with their mental health, or would you refer on to them? I'm totally going off the questions now because I've got distracted. But yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Welsh Government have also been doing a lot of work around rogue landlords acting illegally and unethically. Is this something that you're still seeing?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is something that we are still seeing with regards to our casework. There's a lot of work that needs to be done still along in this area. Unlawful evictions could be down to a landlord serving a notice illegally, harassment, and many other reasons as well. We've done a lot of work with Welsh Government and other partners as well to tackle this, and we continue to do so. However, there is still some work to be done in this area.
Thank you. I agree. But there's a lot of work to be done still in this area. That's my opinion, not TPAS's. Often people who need help are those that aren't aware of what they are actually entitled to. Do you help people in these situations and do you refer them on? So I kind of asked that question already. Would you have like a broad range of partners, and would you be able to, talk about some of those perhaps?
I mean, one of our advice aims is to recognise that people come with a cluster of problems, a range of problems, and other underlying factors that mean that whatever solution we may help people to find may not actually stick unless you're addressing some of the underlying. So we've got a really strong partnership with Citizens Advice Cymru, which allows us to collectively, between us, we're offering generalist and specialist housing, debt, welfare benefits and employment law across Wales. So a good sort of bundle. Snap Cymru is another partnership that allow education advice. And then there's a range of what are called sort of access partners that in a sort of structured setting who don't particularly deliver advice, but perhaps they deliver services for the BAME community or Mind or older people. So we're also working with those to raise awareness of the services that we provide and to understand the services that they provide, so we can refer on, particularly when there's a sort of very pronounced issue that is obvious will undermine their housing going forward if it's not addressed or they're not supported.
So those on the phone lines, Gemma, everybody just has this awareness then, is it, of all these different organisations that they can refer the person on to?
Yeah, awareness of the services that we can refer people on to, and obviously work very closely with our referral partners. We also engage very closely with local caseworkers and obviously gather the knowledge that they have in their areas also. And we've recently launched our young person's portal. So anybody who's aged 16 to 24, we've got a young person's portal on our advice online pages, which includes a search tool then, which includes national services and individual services across Wales that support young people. So if that could be accessed by anybody. So if somebody preferred not to speak to somebody on the advice line, all that information and all the resources are available on our advice pages. So you can click in your local authority and that will pull up all the support services in that area that you can access.
That's fabulous. I think it's so important. Like there's so, it's so hard to know as a young person what you're supposed to be doing in those situations, especially, young mums and young parents, and they've come into this accommodation, they don't know the rights and things. I think it's fabulous that you've got that. Mm-hmm. And last but certainly not least, if you could make one change to housing policy in Wales, what would it be? And I know there's going to be way more than one, but what's that one that you could change? You can both have one each, so.
We can have one each.
You can have one each.
That's lucky because we talked about it in advance and we had two that we were trying to cram in.
Then.
So shall I go first? Mine is we would like to have in Welsh legislation a right to adequate housing for everyone. At the minute, there's no absolute right. There is some rights to some people to help if you become homeless, but there isn't actually a right to be adequately housed in the way that you have an absolute right to education if you have a child, you have an absolute right to the health service in one form or another. You don't have a right to housing. So we're very keen on seeing a right to housing put in law where it is enforceable and to sort of drive forward at more speed the rate of progress in meeting unmet housing need. That's my one.
Yeah, I like that one, and I'll let you go, Gemma, before I speak.
Yeah, okay. And we mentioned this earlier on as well, and a lot of progress has been made in regards to particularly Section 21 notices, with regards to the 6 months extension on that. However, we would like to see it go past March. And we ultimately we want to see the end of Section 21, no fault evictions. For people facing homelessness, and to give everybody across Wales that sort of more safe and secure home without the risk of being served a Section 21 notice.
Yeah, I think I agree with both. I think the right to adequate housing for me is more about what adequate means, and I think there's, you know, that kind of really detailed, and I don't think it can be prescriptive either, because I think it's based on everybody's different needs, and I think that personal, like, you know, one-to-one person-centered approach is really necessary as well. So that kind of increase in funds to enable more support, you know, more support people on the ground to make, you know, help make those decisions, and to be working with tenants to make those decisions. And
yeah, it's a right to a home, isn't it? Not a right to a house.
Yeah.
And for it to be a home, there's quite a lot of elements need to be in place, not just the house itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a, you know, just a box shell is not sufficient, really, is it? So yeah, I agree completely, and with the section 21 notices, Gemma. So thank you both so much for being here today, and I'll share all this information that's been spoken of today, everything that's Shelter are doing, on this page that you can, so everybody can find the links to it. Thank you.